very much. Great to have you all here. So let me get my screen up and shared, and we should be on our way. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen. Somebody will wave their arms if they cannot. Cool. So this is a presentation I give called Innovation Labs with Google. As the name sounds, we do this as a lab format. So I can run this as a 1-day thing, 2-day thing, 3-day thing. I have friends that run it for 5 days, 6 weeks. There's a lot of different processes, but I try and condense it down. You're going to get the 1-hour version, which is really condensed. So think of it as a very beautiful degustation menu or tasting plate of Google innovation thoughts and ideas. So hopefully you enjoy. Now, this is a rhetorical question because you're all panelists. I'm a panelist and you're all in the audience level there, but do you know what this is? Just take a little bit of moment to think about it, answer it so you know in your head. If you've got it right, you're very clever. It's the Model T Ford, and it came in any color so long as it was black. But eventually the Model T Ford had other colors, and they painted them mostly in dark colors for various reasons. And it took 37 days to change the color of a Model T Ford or paint it right from a raw state to finish. And so the management at Ford was kind of upset with this, went to the engineers, said, hey, can you paint this faster? So they went away and they thought, well, if we do this, 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 and this, and we change that process, sure, we reckon we can paint this 20% faster, or greater than 20% faster, in 30 days to change the color of the Model T Ford. So the management, again, was kind of nonplussed by this. So they went off and had to think about it. And one guy in particular went around, he went on holidays, and while he was on holidays, he saw a lacquer store. And in that lacquer store, he saw that they had this painting method that they could repaint the lacquer. And so he brought that back and he said to the engineers, this would rapidly, allow us to repaint things. We'd have to modify it a bit for the automotive industry, but this could be a real thing. He got a lot of pushback internally. And so one thing he did, which was quite brilliant, is he grabbed his largest detractor and he took them to lunch. And he took them to lunch away from work. So they both drove out to some restaurant in the middle of nowhere, and they had lunch together. And while they were in having lunch, the protagonist went and had his people repaint the car of the detractor, and it was repainted a different color in 1 hour. And when his detractor came out and saw his car was a different color, he became the greatest ally that guy had. Because he said, if you can repaint a car in an hour, we can work out how to get that into the engineering system of Ford. And indeed, from that interaction came automotive spray painting. So one thing I want to talk to you about here is don't be blocked by detractors. Make them your allies. Work with them really hard. Don't alienate them. Don't ignore them. Some of the people who fight against you the hardest can be your greatest allies if you put the time and effort into it. But above all, when you're thinking about innovation, you need to think differently. And it can't be 10% differently. It can't be 20% improvement differently. You've really got to challenge yourself. So Larry Page said this about 3 months after I started at Google. He said, incrementalism leads to irrelevance, especially in technology, because change tends to be revolutionary, not evolutionary. And he's right. If you think about the internet, if you think about, the smartphone, if you think about COVID, all of these things, like the internet gave us 10 to 15 years to adapt. The smartphone gave us 3 to 5 years to adapt. COVID gave us 3 to 5 days. Go home on Thursday, come back on Monday. Don't come back on Monday, by the way. And I hope your company still works. COVID is the C-level executive responsible for more digital transformation in the history of mankind than any other change. But it was this revolutionary moment where you just had to change. You had to get on board. You had to do something about it. So the thing is, if your company is only looking at incrementalism, or if you're only looking at incrementalism, and even one of your competitors is looking at large leaps forward, bigger leaps forward in terms of changes in technology, you will be wrong-footed. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually you will be wrong-footed. So when we're looking at the big things we want to do in the future, it's about, we don't know how to get there yet. We have a vision, we have a dream of what we want to do or a problem we want to solve. We don't have the solution yet. We might know that there's a real need. We might know that there's some piece of technology that might make it feasible, and we might believe that we can build a viable business model out of it, but we don't have the skills, we don't have the competencies, we don't have the processes to execute. So how do you cross this gulf? How do you bridge this gulf in what you're trying to do? And the good news is innovation, transformation, and being the executive of your company is all connected. Because if you think about it, the three jobs that your executive have to do, your CEO and the board, they have to run the business, they have to grow the business, and they have to transform the business. So in running the business, you're always thinking about how do you drive more profitability? How do you optimize for costs and efficiencies? How do you create new products? For transformation, I'm going to jump to the right here. You think about where do we want the company to be in 5 years, 10 years? Where do we think the market's going to be? Where do we think conditions will change? And how would we reorganize everything to make that work? And then how do we proactively in the middle manage all of our capitals, manage the risk, manage our investments to make that happen? And the thing here is you're constantly thinking about not what the thing is today, but where you think it's going to be in the future and how you bridge that gap, how you rearrange people, process, skills. So innovation is actually doing the work of the executive. So if you enjoy innovation and you like the pathway, this is really essential training for how to be the executive of your own company. Whether it's your own company or it's the company you happen to work for at the moment, this is great training. So I've got 4 rules around innovation that can help really unblock it in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So the first one is to fall in love with the problem, not the solution. So all too often people get absorbed by, the metaverse, crypto, big data, something like this, and then they stagger around trying to find some sort of problem that it might actually fit. Just forget the solution. I guarantee you the solutions you have used to this point in time are not the solutions you need for the future of 3 to 5 years from now. As soon as you implement a solution, it's almost immediately legacy anyway. So at the end of the day, focus on the problem, fall in love with that, and let go of the solutions. Allow yourself the freedom to pull out a solution that's no longer relevant and bring in something that is better or works better. So we're thinking differently. We're thinking not painting a car 20% faster from a 37-day window, but how do we bring in a new piece of technology where we can repaint a car in an hour? In this slide, you might think of it as well, like fall in love with traffic congestion, don't fall in love with motorbikes, right? Or cars, because they both suffer from congestion. If you've never been to Jakarta, by God, you get motorbike traffic jams. So, there's other solutions that can be brought in to reduce congestion. So don't fall in love with the technology, fall in love with the problem, which is congestion, and how do you reduce congestion? I'm going to give the example of Google here for a moment because we've all used, or hopefully, we've all used the Google search product at some point in our life, whether we're using it still or not, it's up to you. But at the end of the day, we have to look at the whole problem around this when we fall in love with it. And the whole problem is you have some information you need and you don't know what the answer is to it. So Google's problem is how do we work out what you want and then get you the information that's most relevant to your query? And if people can't spell, that's not your problem. That's our problem to solve. If you don't know the questions or how to phrase it, if you don't know what words to use, if you don't speak the language or the technical domain terms, again, that's not your problem. That's our problem that we need to solve to be the most relevant search engine that we can provide. And now people have started talking to their phones. Nearly 50% of people now use voice search in some way, shape or form, whether from their home speaker or speaking directly to their phone. And when they speak to their phone, it becomes an issue of if you can't speak clearly, if you have a strange dialect, not strange to you, but strange to other people. If you can't enunciate your words, if there's a noisy background, you're talking on a busy road or by a rail platform, If the connection is poor because there's too many people on the NBN because of, work from home, then again, not your problem. This is our problem to try and solve. So in doing that, we create lots and lots of solutions because we're exploring these problems and loving these problems, not just saying this is a search engine and it's great and you should all use it, but we're actually continuing to try and understand the problem, continuing to try and refine the solution as we go along. There's another search engine we have as well, which is YouTube. And YouTube, for the world's sins, the world actually now creates 500 hours of new YouTube video every minute. 500 hours of new YouTube video every minute. And for us to be able to present a search engine on that, so you can find that funny cat video 15 minutes after it's posted, we have to process 500 hours by 25 to 30 frames a second every minute in order to create that index and retrieve it and make it available to you. So again, huge problems created. We've got photos, we have voice conversations happening. We also have a large market share in video conferencing systems. I'm going to say I have a really big complaint here, and I would like, I think I heard there's something like 1,400 people here, so I'd like all of us to agree on one thing out of today. We're going to go to our video conferencing vendor and say, imagine if I could only call Telstra phones from my Telstra phone. I couldn't call Vodafone phones. How would that work as a communication tool? Go to all your video conferencing vendors and say it's not acceptable that you don't interoperate with each other, because it's an open communication we're looking for. We're not looking for a vendor. So bear with me on that one, but I think if you could all do that, we'll make the world a better place just on that one conversation. So when you look at that, we have to build skills, competencies, understanding in a whole range of different fields in order to just solve that one simple problem. How do we help you find the thing you're looking for on the vast thing that is the internet? We have to get really good at streaming data, AI and machine learning, voice, natural language, translation. We need to get great at document processing, device integrations, modern application development, hyper-scalable infrastructure, image and video processing at a massive scale and efficiency, and modern collaboration tools for tying all these things together. So not unsubtle sales pitch here. If you're looking for anything in any of these areas, come talk to Google. I reckon this is the stuff that we do absolutely best, and it is part of a solution you could have in your company as well. The second thing about focusing on the whole problem is to focus on all of the users. So when we talk about building an interface for users, notice I don't use the word customer there. Being customer obsessed or chasing just customer requirements and putting that above all else, that can send you bankrupt. That can get you to build some really dumb stuff. So the goal here is, yes, the customer is really important and their requirements are really key, but there are a ton of other users in this whole equation that are really important. And I want to give you this example. So this is, we call this the glass, but it's an interface that people use to make a request. The glass could also be a desktop, a laptop, an application, a voice interface, a piece of paper that you fill in. It's just an interface for executing a task. Users above the glass make task requests. Sometimes it's a consumer, sometimes it might be you using, say, the Atlassian Jira platform to log a request. The task then gets executed through the glass, and a whole bunch of people run around below the glass and they try and fulfill that request. Think about how many people might be running around to fulfill a mortgage request at a bank. Like tons of people run around behind that. Now, the thing is, you can build a workable process map, for anything. But what we have to think about in terms of the problem is, what if I increase the number of users or the rate of use above the glass by 1,000 or 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000? What would that do to the users below the glass? Would I have to increase the ratio or match the ratio of rate of use to the users below the glass? Or would I be able to exponentially scale the rate of use while keeping the users below the glass linear or flat even? Because if I can keep them flat or very low linear, then every new rate of usage is pure margin on my operational costs. But another important thing comes in here, and that is how happy are the users below the glass? Because if those users are unhappy, then you have an unsustainable ecosystem. They start fighting about it, they start resigning, they start doing all sorts of things that really disrupt the whole value chain of your business. So just because you're not a customer doesn't mean you're not important to the entire equation. And the whole system has to scale at the rate you need it to grow, has to have the right happy ratio of people below the glass, and it has to be reliable, which includes compliance, regulations, all those different things, but just has to be there and not go down all the time and not need to be restarted every night or put into a maintenance mode window every Sunday. These things become critically important to whether you have a scalable system in the whole pipeline. So focus on all the users in the problem, not just the customer. They are important, but they're not the only user, and you can be blindsided by just focusing on the customer. The second thing we talk about is aiming for 10x or 10 times, not 10%. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for this. The first thing is 10x is really compelling. Think about how long it took you to get a smartphone when they first launched. I said 3 to 5 years. I think most lead technical adopters would have raced off to get one pretty much in the first year or two. Even laggards were getting them by 3 to 5 years out. So at the end of the day, this was 10 times better than what came before it. I don't care what you had before the smartphone, it's just better. And so it really was a no-brainer, which is why the whole market position of smartphones has completely shifted. Think about instead beta versus VHS. I'm showing my age here from video cassettes. So think about the fact that beta was actually better than VHS, but VHS won. Why? Because beta was only about 10% better. It wasn't compelling. VHS had first mover advantage. No one was interested in rebuying their library or making the necessary shift. So think about this also when you're asked to do things at work. Things that are, I have to learn a whole bunch of new things. I have to jump through a bunch of new hoops. Why? For 10% better. I'll just keep doing it the way I do it. It just doesn't drive anything. 10x is compelling. You show me a way to do my job 10 times faster that I'll actually enjoy, and don't worry about change management. I'll work that out all by myself. So 10x drives behavior. The other thing is pure math. So 10x is 100 times better than 10%, but it's not 100 times harder, and it's not 100 times more expensive. So there's a couple of things in here. If you have limited capital, please put in the Q&A. If you have unlimited capital, I want to talk to you after this meeting, right? But I'm going to assume you all have limited capital. So if you have limited capital and you want to choose where you invest, then surely you want to put some money into the things that will be 10x better rather than 10% better. And even if you don't, as Larry Page mentioned at the beginning, if just one of your competitors is making 10x bets and you're only doing 10%, they will eventually wrong foot you. So you have to be thinking 10x. You have to be making investments in this way. So the other thing about this is it's not an all or nothing thing. You can still improve your core business. Remember the three things the executive was focused on at the beginning. You are trying to operationally improve the business all the time. And there should be 10% bets in there. So Columbia Business School says maybe 70% of your funds should be directed to those 10% improvements all the time. But they say 20% should be spent envisioning where you want to be in 3 to 5 years. And 10% should be thinking about venturing into completely new spaces. And so that 30%, that's where your 10x's need to be. It doesn't mean you can't have 10x's in the versioning part, but really it's easier to have it in the visioning and the venturing part. Now, I don't think that 70-20-10 is important, except for you should have bets or money in each box. And depending on the risk appetite of your organization, maybe it's 85-12-3, or maybe it's 99.9.1. But you should have money in each of these. You should have time and resources committed to each of these activities, because if you don't, and even one of your competitors does, you will be wrong-footed. And the second thing is 10x does not have to be all or nothing land grab, leap out all at once. If you're making a moonshot, which is what we call 10x, You don't have to jump for the moon in one big go. Like, we all want to be Apollo 11 and jump around on the moon and have a victory dance. But remember that Apollo 1 blew up on the launch pad and killed the crew, and Apollo 13 got lost in space and almost killed the crew. So we don't want to be either of those. So instead of just making one-off moonshots all the time, think about what's the next thing you could do? What's the thing, the closest thing you don't understand that's in the direction? So sight off the moon, make single jumps, rooftop to rooftop, all the way up to the moon. And sometimes you'll go up and sometimes you'll go down, but if you just keep sighting off of that moon and that vision of what you have, you will eventually get there. So another way I like to put this is, if I want to be a healthier version of myself in 10 years' time, despite the fact that I'm 10 years older, then what do I need to start doing today? And what do I need to do tomorrow in order to make that goal achievable? If I just wait 10 years, it's not going to happen. But if I start doing something today and tomorrow and the next day and the day after that, and I set these interim goals and I make these small incremental changes, I can get to my 10x goal over time. So it's about that vision target and the steps we plan to take to get there. And this is where we come into my favorite one, which is to tackle the monkey. Now, if you believe the future of your industry, the future of your company is a monkey that stands on top of a pedestal and recites Shakespeare, then the first thing you should do is work out, does anyone want a monkey that stands on top of a pedestal and recites Shakespeare? The second thing you should do is ask yourself, is it even possible to build the monkey that stands on top of the pedestal and recites Shakespeare? And where would I even start to try and get that monkey going? The last thing you should ever do is spend any time, money, effort, or resource on that pedestal. I say it again, don't build the pedestal. What's the first thing we do when we start a new project? We build a foundation for the project and we horizon the hard stuff down the track. And why? Because we want to show forward progress. So we are an industry of pedestal builders. We repeatedly build pedestals over and over and over again, and we horizon the monkey. If you look at any business strategy from any of your companies, and even some business strategies I've come up against in Google, Horizon 1 is pedestal 1.0. Horizon 2 is pedestal 2.0, and Horizon 3 is a tree full of screaming monkeys. Why? Because if I push all the monkeys to Horizon 3, I get all the time in the world to focus on building beautiful pedestals. We have been able to build pedestals since the time of the ancient Greeks and the Romans. There's nothing fun, there's nothing interesting, there's nothing business critical about that foundation. So don't build pedestals, ever. If you're innovating, focus solely on the monkey. Work out if it is even possible. Go to Horizon 3, grab your tree of screaming monkeys, bring it to the front. Work out which of those monkeys is even possible, and then redline all of the foundations for anything that's not going to be feasible in the future. Why? Because you have limited capital. And it is a conservation of that capital, that energy, that resource that you are trying to achieve by focusing on just what you don't understand. What is it? Where is it you don't have the skills? Where is it you don't have the competencies? Where is it you don't understand the process? How do you work out those things? Somebody else can build the pedestal. You can outsource the pedestal building. Do not build pedestals. So, how do you know what a monkey is? And here's the thing. Any feature in any part of a project you're working on, ask yourself two simple questions. Number one, how uncertain are you that this will be possible? On a scale of 1 to 5. Maybe hypothetically, as a thought exercise, go, how much of my annual salary would I be willing to bet that this would be possible? The higher your uncertainty, the more likely it is a monkey. The second thing you should do is say, if this feature was not possible, how critical is that feature to the entire project? And if it's not possible, it's basically how big is the blast radius to the project if this feature fails to be delivered. If you add up the 1 to 5 of those two things and you get an 8, 9, or a 10, it's a monkey. So go through the features of your project, look for the monkeys, work out your uncertainty, your criticality. When you identify the monkeys, come up with a resource plan for tackling just that feature monkey. right? Make it as cheap and as disposable as you possibly can. So we're not looking about how this would even go to production at this stage. We're just saying, prove to me this monkey we can do it. Prove to me it's not going to fail, and just make that really cheap. And when I say really cheap, make it operationally cheap. 20 grand, 50 grand. If you're above 100 grand, come up with a different plan. Come up with a different architecture. The whole idea here is we are trying to tackle the monkeys, the unknowns. We're de-risking the project before we kick it off. And we're deciding whether this is even going to be possible. We're conserving every ounce of capital we possibly can. Here is another way that Google preserves capital and keeps operational costs low. It's 20% time. Now, this has been called Google's dirty little secret because it's not really 20% time, it's more like 120% time. Like you've got to do your whole day job and then Google will give you 20% time to do whatever else you want. Yeah, it's kind of true, it's kind of false. It depends on who you are, what your role is. If you're struggling to do your role, it's 120% time. If you're smashing it out of the park, I've had 320% time things going on in some of my roles. But at the end of the day, it is the time you are willing to discuss with your manager to give to other projects, other things that are not in your day job, but are ways of advancing the company into the future. And if you find this time in your role about how could we vision a better way of doing things, you are practicing being that executive in the company. If you are given this time, you are actually leadership potential in your company. So Google's dirty little secret is that everyone has 20% time. It's not a Google thing. It's a thing that every company has. Google just gave it a name and put a process around it. So the dirty little secret is you could do this too. Maybe don't call it 20% time, call it something else. But you create this process for allowing yourself to very cheaply collaborate with each other, to vision into the future, to work out how you build the skills, the processes, the competencies for where your company wants to be in 3 years, 5 years. You show your leadership potential and you get your manager to support it. Same way we do it at Google. So it encourages product development, it encourages inter-team collaboration, it enhances our skills, our productivity, and it identifies us as leaders when we take it. The second thing is, and this is straight out of customer experience. Anyone who works with customer experience will identify with this. The first thing they do is they draw it, they build it with art and craft materials, they storyboard it on a whiteboard, right? They don't go off and architect it for production. The nice thing about this is it will never go to production. So why, oh why, do we architect things to a gold and platinum standard right from day one to support 1 billion users if we don't even know the monkeys are all under control? So if you're an architect, then if you're not re-architecting your solution again and again and again, you're almost certainly doing it wrong. If you architect something just once and it goes all the way through to production and it works, I would class that as a minor miracle. And number two, you'll have no idea why it worked. You'll just say, I'm very wise and I've been all around the world a few times and I know when to use a NoSQL database versus a SQL database. You have not done any experimentation or optimization on that capability, and you have no idea whether someone else in a competitor is doing that and might be able to wrong foot you. So re-architect again, again, again. Learn what you don't understand in order to build forward. You can use no-code tools. This is our one. It's called AppSheet. You can plug it into a spreadsheet. We're so open, we can even plug it into a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet rather than a Google Sheet. Probably can't do that with the Microsoft tool, not open. But you can basically auto-generate the app from an entity relationship diagram directly out of a spreadsheet and create an app in 15 minutes. No code. So if you want to put something straight in someone's hand that is the next step on from a storyboard or a scribble, then you can do that. And it doesn't have to be the thing that goes to production. It can just be live user feedback in 15 minutes flat, right? Think about that. It's an agile sprint in 15 minutes. And you've got it in the hands of internal users and you're getting feedback. So at the end of the day, these things, this is what I'm talking about. How fast can you challenge the monkeys? How cheaply can you challenge the monkeys in everything you're doing? So here's a contentious one, and that is cloud. Google is one of the best integrated, most secure clouds in the entire world. If you reach out to me, I will send you articles by people who work with AWS on how much they enjoy using Google Cloud and how much better it is in a whole bunch of different ways. But even if you have to go to production in AWS or Azure, you can still prototype or tackle monkeys inside Google as an innovation cloud. It's actually kind of cool because you can say this isn't intended for production. That's why I'm doing it on Google. You know, if I intended to go to production, I would actually put it on Amazon, and then there's a hope of it getting into production. But use Google as an innovation material. Use it as art and craft. Why? Because it's almost certainly commutable to the other clouds, but it blocks production from ever being done. You can't even go to non-prod in it, right? So create Google Cloud as your innovation cloud, and then work out how you retranslate that into somewhere else. You know what? You might learn why we're better in a whole bunch of different things as well while you go along, and then you might create a production environment. That's my hope and my secret strategy here. But think of cloud as an art and craft material. Even think of Amazon and Azure as an art and craft material. Don't think of it as a pathway to production. Think of it as a disposable way to experiment in what you don't understand. Rule 4, and this is critical. If you do not have failure in your organization, if everything is successful all the time, you are not innovating, you are not transforming, and you are almost certainly not being honest in your business about what is going on. So when you're innovating and you're trying to learn the new skill, the new process, the new competency, learning is the currency of success. And you know this when you first start programming for Android, or you first start looking at a different database, you start to build from beginner to maybe intermediate, maybe even advanced, the competency around that technology. Or when you start to fall in love with a problem, you become a domain expert in understanding the actual problem. So that learning is, you're building an asset in yourself and in other people in the company, and it won't always be successful. So failure is your compost bin and the rich soil of your innovation success, because at the end of the day, even if you can't tackle all the monkeys in the project and the project doesn't get approved, everything you learn stays in your compost bin. And when another project comes up that needs the same skills, you can rummage through the compost bin and pull out something that you know will work. Or maybe you'll try it again and it'll fail again. But you know, over time, you build an asset of that failure and that learning. And that is really critically important. So as you go along, from whether it's rapid early stage prototyping or testing, whether it's early stage POCs, whether you stand it up as an actual project, or whether you graduate it into production, there will always be failure. And the important thing is to record and glorify your failure and make a record of the learning and the asset within your company. Because if you don't, then no one will know it's there. You will not be able to reuse it. You will not gain any advantage from it. So have a compost bin of failure. It is absolutely critical to long-term innovation success. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So you may be familiar with Google Loon. If you're not, stratospheric balloons that use lasers to transmit internet to across areas of the world. Think rural areas that have poor internet connection. It failed, but the laser technology we developed for that became part of something else called Project Tara. This is us picking the laser beam technology out of the compost bin of failure, repurposing it for another project, and that is creating sub-Saharan internet speed for Africa. The second one is Project Gillyweed, and so this is and Project Ono. So these were all about ocean health and creating cleaner oceans. And both of those failed, but we were able to pick through some of those pieces of technology to create Project Tidal. And Project Tidal is specifically around creating more environmentally friendly salmon farming globally. And so this is a new one, and it's again around ocean health, but it's focused more tightly on salmon. And it's essentially Moneyball for salmon, facial recognition for fish, and optimization of fish to feeding and various times. And I'm going to show you how it works. Is you've got a kind of camera that floats around with the fish. Think of it like a visual creepy crawly going around doing facial recognition for fish and optimizing food to fish ratio and weight and growth. But I want you to look at the camera. here, and you can see the shape of it. It's nicely rounded. There's a couple of sensors in there. There's probably room for a few more cameras in there. And this came out of the compost bin of failure, and I know that because if I look at another project, which is our everyday robot project, I recognize a lot of the camera shape here as well. And so I can see the inheritance from something that failed in the past, but developed some cool camera tech. And you know what? Just pick it out of the bin, get started much simpler. And yeah, the very more cameras and the shapes change sort of slightly, but that same thinking is visible in that. And so your failure doesn't mean perpetual failure. Failure is an asset that needs to be collected and guarded and reused. Learning is the currency of your success. So I'm going to do one more thing here, and I'm going to talk about how, I think I skipped a slide. So this is a case study in something that worked, which is Google Street View and ultimately Google Maps. And the concept here is, what if just like Google can crawl the internet, what if we could crawl the whole physical world and build an index of the physical world? And so it started off with Larry Page unsafely driving around in his sports car with a handy cam out the side, and then turning up with a whole, digital, video recording of his trip around San Francisco to Stanford Uni and saying, hey, can you make a map out of that? And so very quickly we got Mark Levoy and Gaurav Garg. That's Gaurav in the back seat there. Hopefully he's wearing a seatbelt. He might not. There's some safety issues here. But again, just drive around the streets, take pictures, work out what you don't understand. You really only need to go up and down one street, gather a bunch of pictures, and you'd start to learn, like, how do we paste them together? How do we get rid of the distortions? How do we read everything on all the signs? How do we tie that back to anything that's listed on the internet? And so you start understanding that, the iteration of this since 2005 has been different cameras, different vehicles, different modes of capturing all this different information. And it's this launch and iterate, make the whole world your laboratory. Just get out there and do it. Like, get out of the room you've been in for 14 weeks talking about doing something, and just go do something. And then bring the learning back and report and say, look, we went out and ran an experiment. We repainted your car a different color, and here's the result. Why? Because so often when I work in enterprises, I walk into a room and there are 11 people arguing about what the one part-time developer or engineer should be doing. That is not common sense. That is very, very bad. It is not a great sign. So if that's what's going on in your organization, grab some 20% time, go do something, bring it into the meeting and say, look, rather than just think about it and turn up to the next meeting, we went and did something, and this is what we learned. See what happens. That will break down a lot of barriers. And if they yell at you and say you're wrong and you're wasting OPEX, find another company to work for, because that's not a great place to work. So I'm going to play this video. Hopefully it comes across okay. People let me know if it's not, but this is the summary of 17. Actually, it was 2018 they made this video, so let's call it 13 years of progress in mapping and Google. Oh, if I can make it play. There we go. Starts quiet.
Maps. They help us get to where we need to go. They make the world more understandable. And this early desire to document the world, to navigate it, has been with us since the dawn of civilization. This is the first map we know of. It's believed to be from around 600 BC. We've been on a mapping journey for over 2,600 years. It's one of humankind's driving forces. And even after all that time, the job isn't done. At first, progress was slow. Latitude and longitude came along 800 years after the tablet. 1,000 years after that, the Chinese invented the magnetic needle. Burst of mapping activity in the 15th century expanded the boundaries of the documented world. New technology meant even more rapid progress. The marine phenomena opened up distant horizons, further accelerating the age of discovery. During the mid-1800s, the first aerial imagery was taken from hot air balloons. The 20th century saw exponential progress. In the 1950s, the first computer-generated map. Satellite mapping in the 70s. The advent of GPS in the 80s. Fast forward to 2005, when Google joined this ancient story with our first local search index, an attempt to build a catalog of where businesses were in the real world. Clearly, the moment was here. We would soon have a useful and meaningful map of the whole world. Turns out it was a lot harder than we thought. We learned that the world is very dynamic and data quickly becomes stale. If we were ever going to succeed in having a meaningful map of the whole world, we needed a new approach. New in-house mapping techniques were developed by combining as many data inputs as possible and tightly coupling them with visualizations built on our Street View, satellite, and aerial imagery assets. We were able to use humans to quickly map dozens of countries. We were helping millions of people every day, but the map of the world was still incomplete. The last 3 years have gotten us closer than the previous 20. Deep neural nets have rapidly accelerated our ability to produce map data directly from imagery. Machine learning also helped us guard against spam and abuse, extract information from the web, and to make our operations more efficient, bringing maps to more than 1 billion people. For the first time in this 3,000-year mapping journey, the completion of this task is within our sights. Ours is the generation that will deliver a useful map of the world everywhere people live and work. This new map is changing the way we travel, how we respond to crisis. It will power virtual assistants and augmented reality experiences. This new map, like the first maps, will change the world. The funny thing, even though it's been nearly 3 millennia, with this new map, you'll be able to hold it in the palm of your hand, just like the Babylonians once did.
So hopefully you enjoyed that. That is a lovely gentleman in the Google Maps team, and indeed a lot of stuff going on in AR, cloud anchors, geospatial APIs around positioning and visual positioning in the world right at the moment. So we've talked about a lot today, and I want to sum it all up. We talked about focusing on the users, all the users, and the problem, and falling in love with that. And that's really around understanding the existing situation. In doing this, what you understand is what is the cost of not fixing it? What is the lost opportunity, or what is the ongoing cost that you're bearing? So it creates compulsion to go forward. The second thing that creates compulsion is 10x thinking, that there's a 10x better way of doing it that will really drive excitement and keep people up awake at night. I mean, what if we could do it 10 times better than we do it today? Being prototype driven, it's not a spelling mistake, pre-prototype, to just keep it the hell away from production. How do you tackle your monkeys? How do you identify the monkeys? And how do you choose really wisely where to spend your operational innovation time to really critically prove out what is and isn't possible, and stop talking about it? Doing is the best kind of learning. Doing is the best kind of learning. Just get in there, do it, show the results. It'll drive so many more changes. Once you've prototyped and you know that it's essentially de-risked, you can prototype. You can even, I'll allow it, you could even build a pedestal, but only after you got the monkey working. At the end of the day, that prototype, that POC, has to be the last thing you ever look at doing. And it's really just the necessary validation of the final business principles to make sure that you can go and ask for business case funding. So all of this is pre-business case. And if you think about it long enough and hard enough, and if we do this together as a day or a 2-day or a 3-day thing, what I'm teaching here is the science of business cases. It is the scientific method of attacking a business case and making sure all aspects of failure have been explored. It doesn't mean it's going to succeed, but we have explored a lot of aspects of failure and unknown before we get the final funding. It really does drive more action. I'll leave you with a couple of things to think about. There's a lovely quote by Fei-Fei Li. She's left Google now, unfortunately, but she says, the tools and technologies we've developed are really just the first few drops of water in what the vast ocean of AI can do. I quite like to take her quote and twist it lightly and say, it's just the first few drops of water in the vast ocean of what we can do. As humans, as engineers, we have not yet begun to tap the potential of what we can achieve, and we should never think our job is done. Finally, think differently. really think differently. There is no perfect way of doing it. Agile is absolutely not the best way to develop software. It's just a good way we've found up till now. Somewhere in the future is somebody already thinking about what a better way of engineering might be in terms of software engineering, or a better version of waterfall that will trump agile, perhaps. Who knows? So think differently. Never think that the thing you're currently doing is the best possible thing that will ever be. Always be willing to throw out that solution for a new solution that will fix your problem in a better way. And finally, I want to thank you for your time and your attention. As I said, nobody has unlimited capital. The older I get, the more valuable my time and attention becomes. And I want to thank you for your time and attention today, and I'll hand back for questions. Thank you.